The year was 1847. As the sun dipped below the rugged horizon of the Cumberland Gap, casting long shadows across the untamed wilderness, a solitary figure moved silently through the forest. Tall Elk, a respected Shawnee hunter, followed the tracks of a wounded deer when the distant sound of commotion caught his attention. What he discovered that evening would forever alter the course of two lives from vastly different worlds. Young woman, heavy with child, lay unconscious at the bottom of a steep ravine, her pale skin a stark contrast against the dark earth. The wagon train that had been her passage west was nowhere in sight. In that moment, faced with the traditions of his people and the growing hostilities between settlers and native tribes, Tall Elk made a decision that defied the expectations of both his world and hers. This is the remarkable story of Abigail Thornton and the man who risked everything to save not just her life, but that of her unborn child. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Oregon Trail had never seemed so endless to Abigail Thornton. 6 months pregnant and widowed, just weeks before the journey began, she had nowhere to turn when her husband's brother, Vernon, offered to include her in the wagon train heading west. "Family takes care of family," he had said, though his eyes never quite met hers when he spoke the words. April 1847 had begun with promise as the caravan of 26 wagons departed Independence, Missouri. The spring air carried the scent of possibility, and despite her circumstances, Abigail allowed herself to dream of the new life awaiting in Oregon Territory. A life where her child might grow up beneath open skies, unburdened by the whispers that followed them in the small Tennessee town she once called home. "You'll ride with us," Vernon had insisted, pointing to his wagon where his wife Martha sat stone-faced, their 3 children crowded around her skirts. "No sense in you managing your own rig in your condition." Gratitude had overwhelmed caution. Now, as the wagon train pushed through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky territory, Abigail understood the true nature of Vernon's charity. Her dead husband's land claim documents were tucked safely in the leather pouch she kept tied to her waist day and night, papers Vernon had casually suggested she let him keep safe on no fewer than 5 occasions. "Seems to me a woman in your delicate state shouldn't be burdened with such worries," he would say, his voice honeyed with false concern as his fingers twitched toward the pouch. The weather had turned that fateful day, dark clouds gathering over the mountains as the wagon train navigated a particularly treacherous pass. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the already difficult trail into a river of mud. The oxen struggled, hooves slipping as wagon wheels ground helplessly against stone and slick earth. Abigail sat in the rear of Vernon's wagon, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly, the other gripping the wooden frame as the vehicle lurched and swayed. Martha had fallen unusually silent, exchanging meaningful glances with her husband as he guided the struggling team forward. "Might be best if we lighten the load," Vernon called back during a momentary break in the downpour. "Some of these personal effects will have to go." "Perhaps we should stop and wait for the weather to clear," Abigail suggested, her voice barely audible above the renewed patter of rain on canvas. Vernon's laugh held no humor. "And risk getting caught in these mountains come winter. No, Mrs. Thornton, we push on." It happened so quickly. The wagon hit a deep rut, tilting precariously to one side. Abigail felt hands at her back, not steadying but pushing. And then she was falling, tumbling through open air. Her scream was lost in a crack of thunder as the ground rushed up to meet her. The pain was immediate and all-encompassing. Something in her leg had snapped upon impact, and a warm trickle of blood ran down her temple. But most terrifying was the cramping in her abdomen, sharp, vicious contractions that threatened the life growing within her. "Vernon!" she called out, her voice a strangled gasp as rain pelted her face. "Martha, help me!" The only response was the continued creaking of wagon wheels, growing fainter as the train moved on without her. Whether they hadn't heard her cries or had chosen to ignore them, Abigail couldn't know. What she did know, with devastating clarity, was that she had been abandoned, left to die in an unmarked grave, her land claim the only inheritance Vernon truly cared about. As consciousness began to slip away, Abigail's final thought was of her unborn child. "I'm sorry," she whispered, one hand still cradling her belly. "I'm so sorry, little one." Miles away, tall elk moved silently through the forest his people had hunted for generations. At 32 winters, he was among the most respected hunters of his band, known for his skill with a bow and his profound understanding of the natural world. The storm had pushed most game into hiding, but his family needed meat, and so he persisted, even as rain soaked through the buckskin of his leggings and moccasins. The track of the wounded deer had led him farther from the Shawnee encampment than he had intended. His people had retreated deeper into the hills as more white settlers pushed through their traditional lands. The tenuous peace between the Shawnee and the newcomers had grown increasingly strained with each passing season. Avoid the wagon roads, Chief Running River had counseled. The white man's justice falls heavily on any of our people found near their trails, regardless of purpose. Tall Elk had intended to heed this wisdom, yet the wounded deer had other plans, its blood trail veering perilously close to a known settler, route through the mountains. He was preparing to abandon the hunt when he noticed something unusual. Fresh tracks cutting away from the main trail, followed by signs of a heavy object sliding down the embankment. Caution warred with curiosity. The wise choice would be to turn back, to respect the boundary between his world and that of the encroaching settlers. But something pulled him forward, some instinct he couldn't name. The woman lay crumpled at the base of the ravine, her dress spread around her like a broken flower. Even from a distance, Tall Elk could see she still lived, the shallow rise and fall of her chest visible despite the rain. Drawing closer, he noticed the swell of her belly, and understanding dawned. This woman carried new life within her. Among the Shawnee, nothing was more sacred than a mother with a child. To leave her would be to condemn two souls, not one. Yet to help her meant risking not only his own safety, but potentially bringing trouble to his people if he was discovered aiding a white woman. "Great Spirit," he murmured in his native tongue, "guide my actions this day." Kneeling beside the unconscious woman, Tall Elk assessed her injuries with careful hands. The broken leg would need to be set and bound. The head wound, though bleeding, freely as such injuries tended to do, appeared shallow. Most concerning was her pallor and the rigidity of her swollen abdomen. The child was in distress. His grandmother, Star Who Watches, was the band's medicine woman. If anyone could help this woman and her unborn child, it would be her. But bringing a white woman into their camp carried tremendous risk, especially now when tensions between settlers and native tribes had escalated to occasional violence. As if sensing his presence, the woman's eyes fluttered open, eyes the color of the summer sky, now clouded with pain and fear. She gasped, trying to scramble away despite her injuries. "Please," she whispered, one protective hand moving to shield her belly. "My baby." Tall Elk raised his open palms in the universal gesture of peace. "Not harm," he said in the broken English he had learned through limited trade interactions. "Help." Abigail Thornton had grown up hearing stories about savage Indians who murdered settlers in their beds. Yet the man before her had gentle eyes that belied those fearsome tales. Pain and desperation made the decision for her. What choice did she have but to trust this stranger? "My leg," she managed through gritted teeth. "I think it's broken." Tall Elk nodded, gesturing to indicate he would need to examine it. When she gave a hesitant nod of permission, His touch was surprisingly gentle as he felt along the limb. The break was clean, a small mercy. He could fashion a splint here, but proper treatment would require more than he carried with him. Using sign and his limited vocabulary, Tall Elk conveyed his intention to take her to someone who could help. The fear in the woman's eyes intensified. "My baby is coming too early," she said, guiding his hand to her belly where unnatural contractions rippled beneath her skin. "Please, help us." The decision crystallized in that moment. Whatever the consequences, Tall Elk could not leave this woman and her unborn child to die. With methodical efficiency, he gathered branches to fashion a travois, a frame of saplings lashed together with strips of hide from his pack, designed to be dragged behind him through the forest. As gently as possible, he lifted Abigail onto this makeshift transport, using his spare buckskin shirt to create padding beneath her. Every movement drew gasps of pain from her lips, but soon she was secured, her broken leg immobilized with improvised splints. "Far?" she asked as he prepared to begin the journey back to his encampment. Tall Elk gestured to the sun, now barely visible through breaking clouds, then held up 4 fingers. 4 hours of travel lay ahead, 4 hours during which this woman's life and that of her child hung in the balance. He offered her a water skin, which she accepted gratefully. "Abigail," she said, pointing to herself with a trembling hand. "My name is Abigail." "Tall Elk," he responded, touching his chest, a small moment of humanity amidst crisis. The journey through the forest was arduous. Tall Elk selected the smoothest path possible, but every root, every dip in the terrain sent jolts of agony through Abigail's broken body. She bit her lip until it bled, determined not to slow their progress with her cries. As they traveled, Abigail drifted in and out of consciousness. In her lucid moments, she found herself studying the man who pulled her through the wilderness. With unwavering determination, he moved with the natural grace of someone completely at home in the forest, reading the landscape in ways she couldn't comprehend. Occasionally, he would stop to check on her, offering water or adjusting her position to ease her discomfort. "Why?" she asked during one such pause, the question encompassing all the complexities of their situation. Why would this man, whose people had every reason to despise settlers like her, risk himself to save her? Tall Elk considered the question, searching for words she might understand. Finally, he placed his hand gently on her swollen belly, then raised it skyward. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "All children," he said carefully. "Gift from Creator." The simple statement pierced Abigail's heart. Despite the vast differences in their worlds, they shared this fundamental truth. The terrain grew steeper as Tall Elk led them deeper into the mountains, following hidden paths that no wagon train could navigate. Abigail's contractions had become more regular, a terrifying development that lent urgency to their already desperate journey. By late afternoon, they created a ridge, and Tall Elk gestured ahead to where a small valley nestled between protective slopes. Thin spirals of smoke rose from what appeared to be a collection of dome-shaped dwellings, partially hidden among the trees, a Shawnee village, carefully positioned to remain unseen from common travel routes. Tall Elk paused, clearly weighing final doubts against necessity. Bringing a white woman into the heart of his people's sanctuary was a momentous decision. Whatever internal debate he experienced resolved quickly as Abigail cried out, a particularly violent contraction seizing her body. He made a sound, a high, distinctive call that mimicked a woodland bird. Within moments, the call was returned. From the valley below, alert had been given. They were expected now. The approach to the village became a blur to Abigail as pain overwhelmed her senses. She was vaguely aware of movement around them, curious faces, exclamations in a language she didn't understand, some voices raised in what seemed like protest. Through it all, Tall Elk's steady presence remained her one constant. They stopped before a larger dwelling near the center of the encampment. An elderly woman emerged, her face a map of deep lines that spoke of decades of experience. Despite her advanced years, she moved with surprising agility, kneeling immediately beside the travois to examine Abigail. "Grandmother," Tall Elk addressed, her respectfully in their shared language. "This woman was abandoned by her people. She carries a new life that comes too soon." Star, who watches, studied Abigail with eyes that seemed to see beyond physical ailments to the very core of a person. After a long moment, she nodded decisively. "Bring her inside," she instructed, already turning to prepare her dwelling. "The child approaches the threshold between worlds. We must act quickly if both are to survive." As Tall Elk carefully lifted Abigail from the travois, she clutched at his arm with surprising strength. "My baby," she whispered, desperation clear in her voice. "Please save my baby." He met her gaze steadily. "Star who watches has brought more children into this world than there are stars in the sky," he assured her, his English careful and deliberate. "Trust her, trust me." In that moment, surrounded by strangers whose language and ways were foreign to her, Abigail Thornton made the conscious choice to place her faith in the man who had found her broken and abandoned. As another contraction seized her body, she nodded, surrendering herself to whatever fate awaited beyond the entrance to the medicine woman's lodge. The last thing she saw before being carried inside was a circle of Shawnee villagers gathering, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Whatever happened next would change not just her own destiny, but potentially that of many others. As darkness claimed her consciousness once more, Abigail's final thought was a prayer, not to the stern God of her childhood, but to whatever. Compassionate force had guided Tall Elk to her side when all hope seemed lost. Inside Star, who watches lodge, time seemed to bend and stretch. The medicine woman worked with swift efficiency, her wrinkled hands moving with the confidence born of countless births attended over her 75 winters. The dwelling was warm, fragrant with herbs that hung in dried bundles from the center, and poles, their healing properties filling the air Abigail breathed. "The white woman's water has broken," Star, who watches, announced in Shawnee, directing 2 young women who had entered to assist. "The child comes too early, but it comes nonetheless. We must prepare." Tall Elk remained at the entrance of the lodge, uncertain of his place in the intimate female ritual of childbirth. Among the Shawnee, men typically waited outside during delivery, but he found himself reluctant to leave Abigail among strangers with no familiar face to anchor her. "Grandson," Star, who watches, said, noticing his hesitation, "your presence brought her here. Perhaps it should remain until she finds her strength." With a nod of gratitude, Tall Elk settled near the head of the bed of soft furs where Abigail now lay. One of the assisting women had removed her sodden dress, replacing it with a clean buckskin shift that allowed access to both her broken leg and swollen belly. The leg had been expertly splinted with strips of cedar and bound with sinew. Abigail's eyes fluttered open, momentary confusion giving way to recognition as she saw Tall Elk. "The baby!" she gasped, hands flying to her abdomen as another contraction seized her. "Coming," he said simply, taking her hand in his own. "Strong medicine here." Star, who watches, approached, offering Abigail a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid. "Drink," she instructed in her own language, gesturing for Tall Elk to translate. "For pain," he explained. "Help baby." Abigail hesitated only briefly before accepting the brew. The taste was bitter but not unpleasant, reminiscent of willow bark and other herbs she couldn't identify. Almost immediately, a warmth spread through her limbs, dulling the sharp edges of her pain without clouding her mind. What followed was a blur of sensation and effort. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as Abigail's body fought to bring new life into the world despite its injuries and exhaustion. Star, who watches, guided her with gentle but firm hands, her face an impassive mask of concentration, broken only by occasional nods of approval. Tall Elk remained a steadfast presence, translating the medicine woman's instructions when needed, offering his hand for Abigail to grip during the worst contractions. In those intense moments of shared humanity, the vast differences between their worlds seemed to dissolve. Outside the lodge, the village held its collective breath. The arrival of a white woman, pregnant and injured, had spread through the small community like wildfire. Some viewed her presence as a dangerous intrusion, others saw only a mother in need. Chief Running River, a leader known for his wisdom and caution, had called a council of elders to discuss the implications while Star, who watches, tended to her patient. Tall Elk has invited trouble to our doorstep, Thunder Voice, a warrior whose family had suffered at settler hands, argued heatedly. When this woman's people discover she is among us, they will come with their guns and accusations. And if he had left her to die, countered Maple Leaf, an elder whose quiet voice nevertheless commanded respect. Would that not prove true every dark tale the white settlers tell about our people? Running River listened to all perspectives before speaking. "The woman is here now," he said finally. "Star, who watches, attends her. Until both mother and child are stable enough to travel, we will offer sanctuary. After that, we must find a way to return her to her own kind without bringing retribution upon ourselves." The decision was made, the council dispersed, though tension lingered in the air like the static before a storm. Inside the medicine lodge, Abigail's labor had reached its climax. "Push now," Star, who watches, instructed through Tall Elk, positioning herself to receive the infant. "Your child comes." With a cry that seemed torn from the depths of her being, Abigail summoned her remaining strength for one final effort. The sensation of release was immediate and overwhelming, a rush of fluid and movement followed by a moment of breathless silence. Then, a thin wail pierced the air, the indignant protest of a new life thrust too early into the harsh light of existence. "A daughter," Tall Elk translated as Star, who watches, efficiently cut the cord and wrapped the tiny red-faced infant in a soft rabbit skin. Small but strong, tears streamed freely down Abigail's face as the medicine woman placed the swaddled newborn on her chest. Despite arriving nearly 2 months before her time, the child had a lusty cry and a determined grip that wrapped around Abigail's finger. When she offered it, "Hello, little one," she whispered, drinking in every detail of the daughter she had feared she would never meet. "We made it." Star, who watches, examined the afterbirth carefully, nodding with satisfaction when she found it, whole and healthy. She prepared a poultice of herbs for Abigail's still bleeding body, murmuring prayers of healing as she worked. "The medicine woman says both mother and child have strong spirits," Tall Elk translated, "but the journey was difficult. You must rest now." Exhaustion claimed Abigail soon after, her arms still cradled protectively around her newborn daughter as both drifted into much-needed sleep. Star, who watches, shooed everyone but Tall Elk from the lodge, instructing him to alert her immediately if either patient showed signs of distress. Left alone with the sleeping pair, Tall Elk found himself contemplating the strange turns of fate that had led to this moment. The woman looked younger in sleep, the lines of pain and fear smoothed from her face. The infant's tiny features held that universal newborn quality that transcended lineage or race, a reminder that all people began their journey the same way, regardless of the paths they would later walk. Dawn was breaking when Chief Running, River entered the medicine lodge. The older man moved with the dignity that had earned him his position, his face impassive as he surveyed the sleeping white woman and her child. "The council has reached a decision," he informed Tall Elk in their native tongue. "The woman and her infant may remain until they are strong enough to travel without risk to their health. Then they must return to their own people." Tall Elk nodded, having expected no different. "And how do we accomplish this return without endangering ourselves? Her own family abandoned her. There may be no one searching for her." Running rivers. Eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "There is a trading post 3 days' journey from here. White trappers and missionaries sometimes pass through. When the time comes, we will find a way." The chief's gaze lingered on the sleeping infant. "The child was born on Shawnee land, under Shawnee care. She is connected to our people now, whatever her future holds." With those words he departed, leaving Tall Elk to contemplate their meaning. Abigail awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight filtering through the smoke hole of a dwelling not her own. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place her surroundings. Then memories flooded back. The fall, the pain, the stranger who had become her salvation. And finally, the birth of her daughter. Her daughter! Panic seized her as she realized the infant no longer lay against her chest. Attempting to sit up, she gasped as pain shot through her splintered leg and battered body. "Be still," came a now familiar voice. Tall Elk sat nearby, and in the crook of his arm rested her swaddled child. She cried, "You needed rest." Relief washed over Abigail at the sight of her daughter, apparently content in the hunter's careful hold. The normalcy of the tableau, a man cradling a fussing newborn to allow a new mother some precious sleep, struck her with its universality. This scene could have played out in any cabin back in Tennessee. "Thank you," she said, the simple phrase inadequate for all it needed to convey, for everything. Tall Elk acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, rising to bring the infant to her mother. As Abigail took her daughter, she was struck by how natural it felt to hold her, despite never having done so before. "She needs a name," Tall Elk said, settling back on his heels. Abigail gazed down at the tiny face, considering. Names held power, her grandmother had always said. They shaped a person's destiny in ways seen and unseen. "Hope," she finally decided. "Her name is Hope." Tall Elk tested the word, nodding his approval. "Good name. Strong." Over the next several days, Abigail began the slow process of healing under Star Who Watch's expert care. The medicine woman's herbal remedies proved remarkably effective for both pain and healing, while her knowledge of childbirth ensured that Abigail recovered from delivery without the fever that claimed so many new mothers. Little Hope thrived, despite her early arrival, growing stronger each day on her mother's milk. The village's initial wariness toward the strange pair gradually softened, particularly among the women who recognized the universal challenges of motherhood, regardless of skin color or language. Morning Sun, a young mother herself with an infant son just 3 months old, became a frequent visitor to the medicine lodge. Though they shared no common tongue, she demonstrated techniques for swaddling and soothing that had been passed down. Through generations of Shawnee mothers, her easy acceptance provided a bridge that others in the village gradually crossed. Tall Elk continued his daily visits, his role evolving from rescuer to interpreter to something harder to define. He brought small gifts, a carved wooden rattle for Hope, fresh berries for Abigail, a comb fashioned from bone. Each offering was presented without ceremony, yet received with growing appreciation. On the 7th day after Hope's birth, Abigail asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "What happens now? To us?" Tall Elk's expression remained neutral, though his eyes betrayed conflicting emotions. "Chief says when strong enough must return to white people. The answer was expected, but nevertheless painful. Abigail had no illusions about the reality of their situation. She couldn't remain indefinitely in a Shawnee village, especially not with tensions between settlers and native tribes growing more volatile by the season. Yet the prospect of returning to a world that had literally cast her aside filled her with dread. "Vernon thinks I'm dead," she said quietly, referring to her brother-in-law for the first time since her rescue. "He'll have claimed my husband's land grant by now. I have nowhere to go." Tall Elk considered this new information carefully. "Trading post," he suggested after a moment. 3 days from here. White people there might help." The proposal was reasonable yet terrifying. A lone woman with a newborn, starting over with nothing but the clothes on her back. The odds of survival seemed impossibly slim. Still, what choice did she have? "When?" she asked, unconsciously drawing hope closer to her chest. 2 weeks, Tall Elk replied. "Leg must be stronger, baby too." 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare herself for re-entry into a world that had no place for her. Abigail nodded her acceptance, though her heart hammered with anxiety. That night, after Hope had been fed and settled in the makeshift cradle the village women had constructed, Abigail found herself unable to sleep. The future stretched before her like a vast wilderness, more threatening than the physical one through which Tall Elk had carried her. A soft sound at the lodge entrance drew her attention. Star Who Watches entered, carrying a small clay pot that emitted a fragrant steam. Without speaking, she gestured for Abigail to drink from it. "For sleep," Tall Elk translated from where he sat near the doorway, his presence so constant that Abigail had almost forgotten he was there. As the soothing liquid warmed her from within, Abigail found her thoughts turning to the man who had become her unlikely guardian. "Why do you stay?" she asked him directly. "You've done more than enough. You have your own life, your own responsibilities." Tall Elk was silent for so long that Abigail thought perhaps he hadn't understood her question. When he finally answered, his words were careful, measured. "Among my people, when life is saved, a bond is formed. I found you, brought you here. Until you reach safety again, responsibility is mine." The explanation was logical, yet Abigail sensed layers beneath it that remained unspoken. Whatever his full reasons, she was profoundly grateful for his continued presence. As the days passed, Abigail's strength gradually returned. Under Star Who Watches guidance, she began to put weight on her healing leg, taking small steps inside the lodge before venturing outside with Tall Elk's steadying hand at her elbow. The Shawnee village revealed itself to be a place of unexpected beauty and order. Unlike the chaotic sprawl of settler towns, every aspect of the settlement existed in harmony with its natural surroundings. Dwellings were positioned to capture sunlight and shield against prevailing winds. Gardens flourished with a variety of crops planted in companion groupings that Abigail, raised on a farm, recognized as ingeniously effective. Children played games that combined recreation with practical skills development. Women worked together at communal tasks, their conversation flowing in a musical language that Abigail found herself straining to understand. Men returned from hunting or fishing expeditions, sharing their bounty according to a system that ensured all received what they needed. It was a way of life both utterly foreign and oddly familiar. The fundamental elements of community, family, and survival, transcending cultural differences. Hope became something of a village curiosity. Her fair skin and the fine dusting of red-gold hair emerging on her tiny head, drawing gentle touches and soft exclamations from the women who came to visit. Far from feeling threatened by this attention, Abigail found comfort in it. Her daughter was being welcomed, accepted, embraced by many hearts. On the 10th day, as Abigail sat outside the medicine lodge, watching Hope sleep in a cradleboard loaned by a village mother, Chief Running River approached. The leader's dignified, Bering made his position clear even before Tall Elk explained who he was. "Chief wishes to speak with you," Tall Elk translated, his expression giving away nothing of what might follow. Running River settled himself opposite Abigail, studying her face with eyes that seemed to evaluate not just her physical recovery, but some deeper quality she couldn't name. When he spoke, his words flowed like water over stone, smooth yet powerful. "The chief says you heal well," Tall Elk translated. "Your daughter grows strong despite her early arrival. These are good signs." Abigail nodded, waiting for what would surely follow, confirmation of her impending departure. "In 4 days," Running River continued through Tall Elk, "a party of our hunters will travel to the trading post for supplies we cannot make ourselves. You and your child will go with them." Though expected, the pronouncement still landed heavily in Abigail's chest. 4 days. Her time in this unexpected sanctuary was drawing to a close. "The chief asks if you have family elsewhere who might receive you," Tall Elk continued, clearly uncomfortable with the question he was required to pose. Abigail considered lying. It would be easier perhaps to invent a waiting aunt or cousin rather than admit the stark truth of her isolation. But these people had saved her life, her child's life. They deserved honesty. "No," she admitted. "My parents died when I was young. My husband's family." She gestured vaguely toward her splintered leg. "They've made their feelings clear." Running River listened to Tall Elk's translation of her response, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. After a moment of contemplation, he spoke again, this time at greater length. "The chief says that leaving you at the trading post with no protection would be dishonorable," Tall Elk translated carefully. "Among our people, a child born in our midst creates connections that cannot be severed by circumstance. Your daughter drew her first breath on Shawnee land. She is tied to us now." Abigail's heart quickened, uncertain where this declaration was leading. "Tall Elk will accompany you to the trading post," the translation continued. "There is a white man there, a fur trader who has dealt fairly with our people for many seasons. He has connections with the settlement at Fort Williams. Tall Elk will speak with him about finding you a place there, away from those who meant you harm." The unexpected offer of continued assistance brought tears to Abigail's eyes. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, the question directed as much to Running River as to Tall Elk himself. After translation, the chief's response came with calm certainty. "Because it is right," Tall Elk relayed, "and because not all bridges between our peoples should be burned. Perhaps your daughter will remember when she's grown that her life was valued by the Shawnee. Perhaps that memory will matter in days yet to come." With those words, Running River rose and departed, leaving Abigail to contemplate their meaning. Beside her, hope stirred in her cradleboard, tiny fists waving in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the trees above. So small, yet already a bridge between worlds that too often clashed in bloodshed and misunderstanding. 4 days. 4 days until they would leave this unexpected sanctuary and venture back into a world that had no place for them. 4 days to prepare for whatever waited beyond the boundaries of this village that had become, against all odds, a kind of home. Abigail reached out, gently taking Tall Elk's hand in her own, a gesture that crossed the boundaries of language and culture. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not leaving us behind." His fingers tightened around hers briefly before withdrawing. 4 days, he replied, his eyes holding a promise more binding than any words could express. Then a new journey begins. The 4 days before departure passed with surprising swiftness. Each morning, Star, who watches, examined Abigail's healing leg, nodding with quiet approval at the progress. The break had been clean, and the medicine woman's skills had ensured proper alignment as the bone began to knit itself back together. "You carry good fortune in your bones," Tall Elk translated for the elderly. Many moons will pass before you walk without pain, but walk you will. Abigail accepted this prognosis gratefully. A permanent limp seemed a small price to pay for survival, hers and Hope's. Throughout the village, preparation for the trading expedition intensified. Pelts were gathered and bundled, crafted goods inspected for quality, lists of needed supplies, debated and finalized. 5 men would make the journey, including Tall Elk and Swift Fox, the band's most experienced trader, whose ability to barter in broken English made him invaluable in such transactions. On the evening of the 3rd day, morning, Sun appeared at the medicine lodge carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. Her infant son, Little Bear, rode securely on her back, his bright eyes taking in everything around him. With gestures and her limited vocabulary, Morning Sun indicated that Abigail should open the package. Inside lay clothing, a buckskin dress, adorned with subtle beadwork along the collar, soft leggings, and moccasins sized for Abigail's feet. For journey, the young woman explained, demonstrating how the dress would open easily for nursing Hope. White clothes. She made a tearing motion with her hands, indicating the ruined state of Abigail's original garments. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes at the unexpected gift. The clothing represented hours of work, freely given to a stranger who would soon depart. Their lives, through Tall Elk's occasional translations, she had learned that Morning Sun had lost her sister to a settler's bullet the previous year. Yet here she stood, offering kindness to a woman from that same world. "Thank you," Abigail said, the words wholly inadequate. On impulse, she reached for the silver locket that still hung around her neck, the only possession besides her land grant papers that had survived her ordeal. Inside were miniature portraits of her parents, painted when she was just a child. Unfastening the chain, she held it out to Morning Sun. "For you," she said, "to remember." Morning Sun hesitated, clearly understanding the value of such an item. When she finally accepted the gift, she immediately placed it around her own neck, her free hand touching the locket with reverence. No translation was needed for the look that passed between the two women, a recognition of shared humanity that transcended the boundaries between their worlds. Later that night, as most of the village slept, Abigail sat awake with Hope nestled against her chest. Tomorrow they would leave this place of unexpected sanctuary, venturing into an uncertain future. The prospect filled her with both anticipation and dread. A soft rustling at the lodge entrance announced Tall Elk's arrival. He had taken to visiting during these quiet evening hours, their conversations gradually deepening as Abigail's understanding of his simplified English improved, and her own use of gesture and expression became more effective. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, settling across from her near the banked fire. Abigail shook her head. "Too much thinking," she replied, unconsciously adopting his truncated speech pattern. Tall Elk nodded, understanding. "Journey brings new questions." "And new dangers," she added, voicing the fear that had been growing within her. "Vernon may be looking for me." At Tall Elk's questioning expression, she elaborated. "My husband's brother, the man who—" She gestured toward her healing leg. Understanding darkened Tall Elk's features. "Why search for one thought dead?" "The papers," Abigail explained, touching the leather pouch that remained secured at her waist, despite all that had happened. "My husband's land claim. Vernon wants it. If he discovers I survived—" The implication hung in the air between them. Vernon Thornton was not a man to leave loose ends, especially those that threatened his acquisition of valuable property. Tall Elk considered this new information with grave intensity. "This Fort Williams," he said finally, "far from your Wagon road?" "I don't know," Abigail admitted. "I've never been there." "We asked Jackson at the trading post," Tall Elk decided. "He knows these things." Something in his tone suggested that this Jackson person might be more significant than she had initially assumed. You trust this man, this trader? Tall Elk's expression grew distant, as if accessing memories from deep within. Jackson saved my life once, he said simply. When white. Trappers wanted my scalp for a bounty. He is different. This revelation cast their destination in a new light. Not just any trading post, but one operated by someone who had demonstrated character that transcended the hostilities between their peoples. It offered a glimmer of hope that Abigail hadn't dared to entertain. Rest now, Tall Elk advised, rising. To leave. Tomorrow's path is long. As he turned to go, Abigail spoke once more. Tall Elk? When he paused, she continued, "Thank you for continuing this journey with us." His response was barely audible, but unmistakable. Always. Dawn broke clear and cool on the day of departure. The trading party assembled at the village's edge, laden with goods for barter and supplies for the journey. Abigail emerged from the medicine lodge, wearing Morning Sun's gift, the buckskin dress a perfect fit for her still-healing body. Hope was secured against her chest in a carrying sling that left Abigail's hands free for the walking stick Star, who watches, had provided. The medicine woman herself stood waiting, a small pouch of herbs and supplies extended toward Abigail. "For the child," Tall Elk translated the elder's instructions. "If fever comes, 3 pinches in water twice each day." Abigail accepted the gift with deep gratitude, embracing the older woman awkwardly but sincerely. "I will remember," she promised, the words encompassing far more than just the herbal remedy. Chief Running River approached, his presence lending gravity to the moment. "The chief says you travel now under Shawnee protection," Tall Elk translated. "The men of this party will see you safely to Jackson's post. What comes after depends on many things, but you will not face it alone." The assurance brought a measure of peace to Abigail's anxious heart. She had entered these mountains a desperate, abandoned woman with nothing but her unborn child and the clothes on her back. She departed with not just her daughter in her arms, but with allies and perhaps even friends. As the small group set out along a narrow trail that wound deeper into the mountains, Abigail found herself positioned between Tall Elk at the front and Swift Fox at the rear. The other 3 men, Strong Water, Pine Bark, and Young Hawk, maintained a vigilant perimeter as they traveled. Progress was necessarily slow. Though Abigail's leg had healed remarkably under Star, who watches care, it could not bear her full weight for long periods. Every hour or so, the party would stop briefly to allow her to rest. During these pauses, Hope would nurse, the men would check their surroundings, and Swift Fox would often share dried berries or pemmican from his pack. These men, whom she had initially feared as savages, demonstrated a consideration for her condition that surpassed anything she had experienced among her own people. There were no complaints about her pace, no impatient sighs or pointed looks. Instead, they adjusted seamlessly to her limitations, treating them as simply another aspect of the journey to be accommodated. By midday, they had covered perhaps 5 miles, a distance that would have been trivial under different circumstances, but represented a significant achievement given Abigail's condition. They stopped near a small stream, the men establishing a perimeter while Tall Elk helped Abigail settle on a fallen log. "Good progress," he commented, filling a water skin from the stream and bringing it to her. "Path grows wider soon." As Abigail drank gratefully, she noticed Swift Fox engaged in animated conversation with Strong Water, both men gesturing toward a ridge to the east. "Is something wrong?" she asked Tall Elk when he returned from his own brief consultation with the others. "Perhaps," he acknowledged, his expression guarded. "Smoke on horizon, not Shawnee camp. Could be a hunting party, could be—" He left, the alternative unspoken, but Abigail understood. It could be settlers, possibly even search parties looking for a woman presumed dead. "Should we turn back?" she asked, unconsciously tightening her hold on Hope. Tall Elk shook his head. Forward path is safer now. Trading post one day, maybe two with your pace. Jackson's Place has strong walls. The group resumed their journey with heightened vigilance, Swift Fox and Young Hawk ranging ahead to scout the path, while the others maintained a protective formation around Abigail and Hope. The afternoon stretched into evening, with no sign of whoever had made the distant smoke, but tension remained palpable among their escorts. As dusk approached, Strong Water located a defensible campsite, a small clearing backed by a rocky outcropping that prevented approach from behind, while Pine Bark constructed a minimal fire, carefully shielded to prevent its light from being visible at a distance. The others established sleeping arrangements that placed Abigail and Hope at the site's most protected point. "Sleep now," Tall Elk advised as he spread a buffalo robe for her and Hope. "I took my first watch. Others will follow through the night." Exhausted from the day's exertion, Abigail settled onto the makeshift bed with Hope nestled securely against her. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive as her mind churned with possibilities. Were they being followed? Had news of a white woman in Shawnee territory somehow reached the settlements? Or was the smoke simply from trappers or another native hunting party entirely unrelated to her situation? Sometime later, Abigail awoke to Hope's hungry cries. As she shifted to nurse her daughter, she realized that most of the camp was asleep, with only Swift Fox visible at the perimeter, his silhouette alert against the star-filled sky. Tall Elk's buffalo robe lay empty nearby. A soft sound drew her attention to the clearing's edge, where Tall Elk and Strong Water had just emerged from the surrounding forest. Their expressions were grave as they approached Swift Fox, speaking in hushed tones that nonetheless carried urgency. Adjusting Hope at her breast, Abigail strained to hear their conversation, though she understood none of the Shawnee words exchanged. The men's body language, however, told her enough. Something had been discovered, something concerning. When Tall Elk approached her a few minutes later, his features were composed, but tension radiated from his posture. "We found tracks," he said without preamble. "White men, 6, maybe 7, following the river path below." Abigail's breath caught. "Looking for me?" "Cannot know," Tall Elk admitted, "but they travel with purpose, armed." The implications sent a chill through Abigail's body, despite the warm night. "What do we do?" "Change route," he replied. "Longer path, harder climbing, but less used. If they search for white woman, they expect main trails. The adjustment would add at least a day to their journey, possibly 2 given Abigail's limitations. Yet the alternative, risking an encounter with armed settlers while in the company of Shawnee warriors, could prove catastrophic for all involved. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I've brought danger to you all." Tall Elk's response was immediate and firm. "No, danger comes from men with hatred in their hearts, not from a woman protecting a child." He gestured toward the sleeping forms of his companions. "All here understand this. All choose to continue." His certainty provided a measure of comfort, though guilt continued to gnaw at Abigail's conscience. These men were risking their lives to protect a woman not of their tribe, not of their race, a woman whose very presence among them could be seen as provocation by settlers all too ready to assume the worst about native intentions. "Try to sleep," Tall Elk advised. "Dawn comes early. New path requires strength." Morning arrived with a fine mist that shrouded the forest in ghostly tendrils. The camp stirred to life with quiet efficiency, no unnecessary words, no wasted movements. Within minutes, all evidence of their presence had been erased, the fire pit scattered and concealed, sleeping robes rolled and secured. Strong Water took the lead as they set out, guiding them away from their original route onto a barely discernible path that climbed steeply into rockier terrain. The going was immediately more difficult, particularly for Abigail, whose healing leg protested each uneven step. Tall Elk remained at her side, his hand often at her elbow to steady her on the most challenging sections. "Slow steps," he encouraged, when she faltered. "Sure steps." By mid-morning, Hope had grown fractious, her usual placid temperament giving way to persistent crying that no amount of nursing or rocking seemed to soothe. Abigail recognized the signs of colic. Her sister's children had suffered similarly, but knowledge did little to alleviate the immediate problem of a crying infant in a situation where silence might be essential to survival. After a particularly difficult hour, Swift Fox approached with a small leather pouch. From it, he extracted what appeared to be a piece of deer antler, smoothed and polished to a gentle curve with small indentations along its length. "For baby," he explained in his limited English, demonstrating how the object could be placed in Hope's mouth. "Old medicine, good for pain in gums." Desperate for any solution, Abigail accepted the offering. To her amazement, Hope took to it immediately, her cries subsiding as she worked the smooth antler against her gums. Within minutes, she had fallen into a peaceful sleep, the natural teether still clutched in her tiny fist. "Thank you," Abigail murmured to Swift Fox, who acknowledged her gratitude with a nod before returning to his position. The day wore on, their progress slowed not just by the difficult terrain, but by the need to move cautiously, alert for any sign of the settlers, whose tracks they had discovered. Young Hawk and Pine Bark alternated scouting duties, disappearing ahead or behind for long stretches before rejoining the group with quiet reports that Tall Elk would sometimes translate for Abigail's benefit. "No fresh signs," he informed her, during one such update. "Old tracks only, good sign." By late afternoon, Abigail's strength was flagging noticeably. Her limp had grown more pronounced, and even with Tall Elk's steady support, each step had become an exercise in determination over pain. When they finally stopped to make camp for the night, she sank to the ground with undisguised relief, her hands trembling as she adjusted Hope in her sling. Swift Fox approached with a water skin and a portion of their dwindling food supplies. "Eat," he encouraged. "Tomorrow will be an easier path." As darkness fell, the group settled into the same protective arrangement as the previous night, though this campsite offered less natural defense than the last. No fire was risked, leaving them to eat their cold provisions and seek what warmth they could from their buffalo robes and blankets. Hope, perhaps sensing her mother's exhaustion, nursed efficiently before drifting into sleep, Swift Fox's antler teether still clutched in her tiny grip. Abigail watched her daughter's peaceful face in the fading light, marveling at the resilience of this tiny being who had entered the world under such extraordinary circumstances. "She is strong," Tall Elk observed, settling nearby for his rest. Before taking watch. "Like a mother." Abigail managed a weary smile. "I don't feel very strong right now." "Strength is not always in the body," he replied. "Sometimes in heart." He gestured toward her splintered leg. "Body breaks, heart continues." The simple philosophy resonated deeply with Abigail's experience. Her body had indeed broken, literally and figuratively, yet something within her had refused to surrender. That same indomitable spirit now drove her forward, not just for her own survival, but for the future of the child who depended on her. "How much farther to this trading post?" she asked, needing some concrete hope to focus on. "If the path remains clear, reach the river by midday tomorrow," Tall Elk explained. "Follow the river to Jackson's place before next sunset." Another full day and a half of travel. Abigail wasn't certain her leg would cooperate for that long, but she had little choice but to push forward. The alternative, remaining exposed in the wilderness with unknown settlers potentially searching for her, was far more dangerous. "This Jackson," she began, voicing the question that had been nagging at her since learning of their destination. "You said he saved your life. How did a white fur trader come to rescue a Shawnee hunter?" Tall Elk's expression grew distant, as if revisiting memories long tucked away. "3 winters passed," he began. "Bad times between our peoples. Bounties paid for Shawnee's scalps in some settlements." His hand unconsciously rose to his own head, the gesture more eloquent than words. "I hunted far from the village. Too far. 4 trappers found me alone." His voice remained steady, but Abigail could sense the tension beneath his calm recitation. "They attacked. I fought. Wounded too, but they had guns. Would have killed me. But Jackson appeared." "He stopped them?" Abigail asked, trying to imagine a single trader intervening against 4 armed men intent on violence. He knew these men, had authority over them, said my scalp was not worth the trouble I had caused. A ghost of a smile touched Tall Elk's lips. "Said I had cost them 2 wounded men already, would likely take more before submitting. Better business to let me go." He appealed to their greed, Abigail realized. Tall Elk nodded. "Clever man, Jackson. Speaks with forked tongue when needed, but heart beats true." He adjusted his position, wincing slightly at some hidden discomfort. "After the trappers left, he tended my wounds. Could have left me, but chose to help. Said not all white men think alike. Said one day I might do the same for someone in need." The parallel to her own rescue was unmistakable. "And you did," Abigail murmured, "for Hope and me." "Circle closes," Tall Elk agreed. "Now Jackson will help again. Different person, same spirit." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as twilight deepened into true night. Abigail found herself contemplating the strange chain of events that had led to this moment, how tragedy and blessing had become so thoroughly intertwined that she could no longer separate one from the other. Vernon's betrayal had nearly killed her, yet without it, she would never have experienced the profound kindness of the people who now protected her and her daughter. "Rest now," Tall Elk advised, rising to take his position on watch. "Tomorrow brings new steps on the journey." As Abigail settled beside her sleeping daughter, she found herself offering a silent prayer, not just for their continued safety, but in gratitude for the unexpected grace that had found her at her lowest moment. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them with the knowledge that compassion could transcend the deepest divides between peoples. For the first time since being cast from the wagon, Abigail Thornton slept without fear, shadowing her dreams. Morning arrived with a fine, persistent rain that transformed the forest into a glistening, treacherous landscape. Water dripped from every leaf and branch, turning the already challenging path into a slippery hazard that demanded their complete attention. The group broke camp with minimal conversation, each person focused on the difficult day ahead. "Rain good," Tall Elk observed as he helped Abigail secure Hope in her carrying sling. "Washes away tracks, makes us harder to follow." The practical observation offered little comfort as Abigail contemplated navigating the steep, muddy terrain with her healing leg. Still, she nodded acceptance, knowing they had no alternative but to press forward. Strong Water took the lead again, his keen eyes finding secure footing where Abigail saw only uncertain ground. Their progress was painfully slow, each step requiring careful placement to avoid a dangerous fall. By mid-morning, Abigail's dress was soaked through despite the protection of a leather cape Swift Fox had provided, and Hope had grown restless. In her damp wrappings, when they stopped to rest beneath the partial shelter of a rock overhang, young Hawk approached with what appeared to be a bundle of large leaves. Without speaking, he demonstrated how they could be woven together to create a rain shield for Hope. His fingers moved with surprising delicacy for a warrior, crafting a natural umbrella that he then helped Abigail position over her daughter. "Thank you," she said, touched by the thoughtful gesture. Young Hawk acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod before returning to his position on their perimeter. As they prepared to resume their journey, Swift Fox and Pine Bark returned from a scouting expedition, their expressions grave as they conferred with Tall Elk and Strong Water. Abigail watched the exchange with growing apprehension, recognizing the tension that had entered the men's postures. "What is it?" she asked when Tall Elk finally approached her. "White men," he confirmed, his voice low. "Not the same group from yesterday. Different tracks. 3 men with horses, moving fast along the river below." The news sent a chill through Abigail that had nothing to do with her wet clothing. "Vernon cannot know," Tall Elk admitted, "but they follow the path to the trading post. We must be careful now." Their route adjusted once more, climbing even higher into the rocky terrain where horses would find passage difficult if not impossible. The rain continued unabated, sometimes lessening to a drizzle, only to return with renewed vigor. By early afternoon, Abigail's strength was flagging badly, her splinted leg dragging more with each step despite her determination to maintain their pace. It was Tall Elk who finally called a halt, his concern evident as he observed her pallor and labored breathing. "Need rest," he insisted, helping her to a seated position beneath a sheltering pine. "No good to reach Jackson's place if you fall sick on the way." Too exhausted to argue, Abigail sank onto the damp ground, grateful for the momentary reprieve. Hope miraculously had managed to sleep through the worst of their climb, lulled perhaps by the rhythmic motion and the steady patter of rain on Young Hawk's leaf shelter. Now she stirred, rooting hungrily against Abigail's chest. As she adjusted her dress to nurse her daughter, Abigail noticed Strong Water and Swift Fox engaged in intense conversation some distance away, their attention focused on something in the valley far below. A moment later, Strong Water approached Tall Elk, speaking rapidly in Shawnee, while gesturing toward the distant view. Tall Elk listened intently, his expression growing more troubled with each word. When he turned to Abigail, she could read the concern in his eyes before he spoke a single word. "Wagon," he said simply, "on the river road below, moving toward a trading post." Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. "Can you see who?" "Tall." Elk shook his head. "Too far, but wagon means settlers. Trading post gets a few wagons this season." The implications were clear. If Vernon had somehow learned or suspected she had survived, the trading post would be a logical destination to search for her. It represented the nearest outpost of white civilization in this wilderness, a natural refuge for a woman alone. "What do we do?" she asked, unconsciously drawing Hope closer to her chest. Tall Elk considered their options, his gaze moving from Abigail's exhausted form to the distant wagon and back again. "Continue as planned," he finally decided, "but be more careful now. Reach Jackson's place after dark. Less eyes to see white women with Shawnee warriors." The strategy was sound, yet Abigail couldn't suppress a shiver of apprehension. Vernon Thornton was not a man to give up easily on something he coveted, and her husband's land claim represented considerable wealth. If he had indeed tracked her this far, what would prevent him from finding her at the trading post? As if reading her thoughts, Tall Elk added, "Jackson's place has back way in, for Shawnee trade when other whites present. He understands complications." This reassurance provided some comfort, though Abigail's anxiety remained a tight knot in her chest as they resumed their journey. The rain finally began to taper off as afternoon stretched toward evening, the clouds breaking occasionally to admit shafts of golden sunlight that transformed the dripping forest into a cathedral of momentary rainbows. Under different circumstances, Abigail might have found beauty in the spectacle. Now her focus remained solely on placing one foot before the other, on maintaining the pace needed to reach the trading post under cover of darkness. Her leg throbbed with each step, the pain a constant companion that she had learned to acknowledge. Without surrendering to, Just as twilight began to settle over the landscape, Strong Water raised a hand for silence, his posture alert as he scanned their surroundings. The others immediately froze in place, hands moving to weapons with practiced ease. Even Tall Elk, who had remained consistently at Abigail's side, shifted to a protective stance, one hand on the knife at his belt, while the other gently urged her behind him. Long moments passed in tense silence as Strong Water conferred quietly with young Hawk, who had returned from scouting ahead. Finally, both men relaxed slightly, though their vigilance remained evident in their postures. "What is it?" Abigail whispered to Tall Elk. "Riders pass below," he explained softly. "Same three from before, moving away from the trading post now, searching for a pattern." The news carried mixed implications. On one hand, whoever these men were, they appeared to be moving away from their destination. On the other, their search. Pattern suggested a deliberate hunt rather than casual travel. "We continue," Tall Elk decided after consulting with the others. "River close now. Trading post, not far, once we reach water." The descent toward the river proved almost as challenging. As their earlier climb, the rain-slicked slopes treacherous in the fading light. By the time they reached the riverbank, full darkness had fallen, with only a quarter moon occasionally visible through breaking clouds to light their way. Strong Water led them along a narrow path that hugged the water's edge, hidden from the main trail by a screen of willows and river birch. The soft gurgle of the current provided natural cover for any sounds they might make, allowing them to move more quickly than they had all day. Abigail was operating on pure determination now, her physical reserves long since depleted. Only Tall Elk's steadying presence at her side kept her upright, his strong hand at her elbow preventing more than one potentially disastrous stumble. Hope, sensing perhaps her mother's exhaustion, remained blessedly quiet, content with the antler the swift fox had provided, and the occasional murmured reassurance from Abigail. The infant's resilience continued to amaze, her adaptability to these adverse conditions seemingly boundless. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, a flicker of light appeared through the trees ahead. A lantern hanging from a post, marking what must be the perimeter of the trading post. As they drew closer, the outline of a substantial log structure emerged from the darkness, surrounded by a sturdy palisade of sharpened logs. Rather than approaching the main entrance, visible as a gate on the building's far side, Strong Water led them along the palisade wall to a smaller door, nearly invisible among the shadows. Here he paused, producing a distinctive bird call that cut through the night air. 3 short notes followed by 1 long, then repeated. Seconds stretched into a minute with no response, and Abigail felt her hope beginning to waver. Then, faintly, the same call pattern returned from inside the palisade. Strong Water repeated the signal once more, adding a 4th short note at the end. The small door creaked open just enough to reveal a wedge of lantern light and the silhouette of a man holding a rifle at ready. "Who comes?" a gruff voice demanded in English. "Friends of Jackson," Swift Fox responded, stepping forward where he could be seen clearly. Shawnee traders, Strong Water, Swift Fox, Young Hawk, Pine Bark, Tall Elk. A moment's hesitation, then, "Since when does Tall Elk travel with a woman and babe?" The rifle remained steady, neither lowering nor raising as the speaker clearly noticed Abigail, despite the shadows that partially concealed her. "Long story," Swift Fox replied. "For Jackson's ears. Women needs help. Child too." Another pause, longer this time. Finally, the door swung wider. "Come in then, but quietly. There were riders asking questions today, questions about a missing white woman." Abigail's breath caught at this confirmation of her fears, but there was no turning back now. With Tall Elk's supporting hand at her elbow, she followed Swift Fox through the doorway and into the trading post's inner yard. Their guide, A weathered man of perhaps 50, with a silver-streaked beard and the leathery complexion of someone who had spent decades outdoors, secured the door behind them before leading the group toward a smaller building attached to the main trading post structure. "Jackson's in the main hall with customers," he explained in a low voice. "Best you wait in the storeroom till they've gone." His sharp eyes assessed Abigail's exhausted state and the infant in her arms. "You look 'bout dead on your feet, ma'am. There's a bench inside where you can rest while I fetch the boss." The storeroom proved to be a surprisingly comfortable space, well organized with shelves of supplies and trading goods. True to the man's word, a sturdy bench lined one wall, which Abigail gratefully sank onto, her splintered leg throbbing in relief at the cessation of movement. "We made it," she murmured to tall Elk, who had settled beside her, his own exhaustion finally visible now that they had reached relative safety. He nodded, some of the tension easing from his posture. "Jackson will help now." Swift Fox and the others positioned themselves near the room's single window and door, their alertness undiminished despite the long journey. They had fulfilled their promise to deliver Abigail and Hope safely to the trading post, but their protective instincts remained engaged until Jackson himself confirmed their security. They didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, the storeroom door opened to admit a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shock of red hair shot through with grey and a beard that reached nearly to his chest. His clothing was a curious blend of frontier trapper and native influence. Buckskin, trousers paired with a faded cotton shirt, moccasins instead of boots, and a necklace of bear claws visible at his throat. "Well, well," he said, his voice pitched low, but carrying a resonant quality that filled the small space. "When Silas said Tall Elk had brought a white woman and babe to my back door, I thought he'd finally taken to the whiskey." His keen blue eyes swept over the group, lingering on Abigail and Hope. "Seems the old coot was sober after all." "Jackson," Tall Elk greeted, rising to clasp forearms with the trader in the traditional Shawnee manner. "We come seeking help." "So I gather." The trader's gaze returned to Abigail, his expression softening as he noted her obvious exhaustion and the splint on her leg. "You've had a rough time of it by the looks of things, ma'am." Abigail managed a weary nod. "My name is Abigail Thornton. This is my daughter, Hope." She hesitated, uncertain how to condense her extraordinary circumstances into a brief explanation. "She was thrown from the wagon," Tall Elk supplied, sensing her difficulty, "by her husband's brother, for land papers. I found her in the forest. Taking her to Star Who Watches saved both lives." Jackson's bushy eyebrows rose at this succinct summary of events. "Thrown from a wagon by family?" He shook his head in disgust. "And they call the Shawnee savages." He pulled up a stool, settling himself across from Abigail. "I reckon there's more to this tale that'll need telling, but it can wait till you've rested. Right now we need to sort out your immediate situation." "There have been men searching for her," Tall Elk continued. "3 riders, 1 wagon, asking at the trading post today." Jackson's expression grew grave. "Aye, that they have. A Mr. Vernon Thornton, claiming his poor widowed sister-in-law wandered off from their wagon train in a fit of pregnancy madness, offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return to his loving family care." The sarcasm in his final words made his opinion of these claims abundantly clear. "He's here?" Abigail whispered, color draining from her already pale face. "Was here," Jackson corrected. "Left just after sunset, heading upriver to continue his search. Said he'd be back tomorrow to see if any news had come in." He studied Abigail thoughtfully. "I take it you're not eager for a family reunion?" "He pushed me from the wagon during a storm," Abigail stated flatly. "Left me for dead, so he could claim my husband's land grant. If the Tall Elk hadn't found me..." She left the grim alternative unspoken. Jackson absorbed this information with a slow nod. "Well then, We'll just have to make sure Mr. Thornton doesn't complete what he started, won't we?" He rose, moving to the storeroom door to speak briefly with someone outside before returning to address the group. "My wife's preparing a room for you and the little one," he informed Abigail. "It's above the trading hall, but has a separate entrance from the back staircase. No one will know you're here unless I choose to tell them." He glanced at the Shawnee warriors. "As for you lot, you're welcome to use the trapper's cabin out back. It's not much, but it's dry and has sleeping pallets. We stay tonight, strong." Porter decided after consulting briefly with the others. "Return to the village tomorrow when the woman and child are safe." Jackson nodded approval. "A wise precaution. I've no doubt this Vernon fellow would be most unhappy to find his presumed dead sister-in-law has miraculously survived. Men like that tend to solve such problems permanently." He returned his attention to Abigail. "Come morning, we'll need to decide what's to be done with you long-term. Fort Williams is 3 days' ride from here, but I've got a supply wagon heading that way in a week. The settlement there is large enough that you could disappear into it, start fresh where your brother-in-law wouldn't think to look." The plan made practical sense, yet Abigail found herself unexpectedly reluctant to embrace it. Fort Williams represented safety from Vernon, yes, but also separation from the people who had become her protectors and, in some ways, her family. During these extraordinary circumstances, her gaze sought Tall Elk's, finding in his steady eyes the same conflicted emotions she felt. They had begun as strangers from hostile worlds, yet forged a connection that defied easy categorization. The prospect of a final parting left an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Before she could formulate a response to Jackson's suggestion, the storeroom door opened again to admit a woman whose appearance momentarily stunned Abigail into silence. Tall and regal, with copper skin and the distinctive features of a native woman, she wore a calico dress in the settler style, her black hair arranged in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. A simple silver cross hung at her throat, the only adornment. On her otherwise unembellished attire, "Sarah," Jackson greeted, his voice warming noticeably. "This is Mrs. Thornton and her daughter, Hope, our guests for the foreseeable future." The woman approached, her dark eyes assessing Abigail with compassionate directness. "You look exhausted, dear," she observed, her English fluent and unmarked by any accent Abigail could detect. "Let's get you and the little one settled. A hot meal and clean bed will work wonders after what you've been through." As if responding to the gentle authority in Sarah's voice, Abigail found herself rising despite her exhaustion, ready to follow this unexpected mistress of the trading post. She paused, however, turning back to the Shawnee warriors who had risked so much to bring her to this sanctuary. "Thank you," she said, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "For everything." Swift Fox nodded acknowledgement, while Pine Bark and Young Hawk offered small gestures that needed no translation. Strong Water, who had led them through so many dangers, stepped forward to place a weathered hand briefly atop Hope's head in a gesture of blessing. Finally, Abigail's gaze met Tall Elk's. Words seemed wholly inadequate for all that had passed between them, for the life debt that could never truly be repaid. "I don't know how to say goodbye," she admitted softly. "Then don't," he replied simply. "Not yet. Morning brings new light, new thoughts." With that cryptic response lingering in her mind, Abigail allowed Sarah Jackson to lead her from the storeroom, hope still cradled securely against her chest. Tomorrow would indeed bring new decisions, new pathways forward. But tonight, at least, they had reached a momentary haven in their extraordinary journey. As Sarah guided her up a narrow back staircase to the promised room, Abigail found herself wondering what direction her life would take from this unexpected juncture. The land claim that Vernon so coveted remained secured at her waist, representing a future she had once thought certain. Yet the experiences of these past weeks had transformed her understanding of what truly mattered, of what constituted real wealth in this harsh frontier. When they reached the small but clean room with its narrow bed and washstand, Sarah helped. Abigail settled Hope in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer lined with soft blankets. "Rest now," the older woman advised. "I'll bring food shortly. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about what comes next." Left alone with her sleeping daughter, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind and body equally exhausted, yet, strangely, alert. Through the room's single window, she could see the moon emerging from behind scattered clouds, casting silver light across the trading post's yard. Somewhere below, Tall Elk and the others were settling into their temporary shelter. There, mission nearly complete, what would morning bring? A final farewell to the man who had saved not just her life, but her very soul from despair. A new beginning in a settlement of strangers at Fort Williams, or some third path she couldn't yet envision. As sleep finally claimed her, Abigail's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for the compassionate Shawnee hunter who had found her broken body and seen not an enemy, but a fellow human in need. Whatever tomorrow held, that fundamental connection had forever altered the course of her life. Abigail awoke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the unfamiliar sensation of a real bed beneath her. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The room, with its plain but sturdy furnishings, bore no resemblance to the medicine lodge or forest camps of recent days. Then memory rushed back. The trading post, Jackson and his wife, the news that Vernon was actively searching for her. A soft gurgle drew her attention to the makeshift cradle where Hope lay awake, tiny fists waving in the air as she greeted the new day with apparent enthusiasm. Despite the dangers that still surrounded them, Abigail couldn't suppress a smile at her daughter's resilience. "Good morning, little one," she murmured, lifting the infant into her arms. "We've come a long way together, haven't we?" A gentle knock at the door preceded Sarah Jackson's entrance. The woman carried a tray laden with a steaming bowl of porridge, fresh bread, and a pot of what smelled like real coffee, a luxury Abigail hadn't experienced since leaving Independence. "I thought you might be awake," Sarah said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "Your daughter's cries carried down to the kitchen earlier. I would have come then, but thought you might prefer to tend to her yourself." "Thank you," Abigail replied, genuinely touched by the consideration. "For everything." Sarah waved away, the gratitude with a practical gesture. "Eat while it's hot. We've much to discuss this morning." As Abigail settled at the table with Hope nestled in one arm, Sarah produced a small bundle of cloth from a pocket in her apron. Unwrapping it revealed tiny garments, a gown, cap, and blanket sized perfectly for a newborn. "My youngest outgrew these just last year," she explained, noting Abigail's surprise. "They've been packed away, but clean enough. That carrying sling you've been using could use a washing." The unexpected kindness brought tears to Abigail's eyes. Since Hope's birth, she had managed with improvised wrappings and the generosity of the Shawnee women. The prospect of proper baby clothes seemed an almost unimaginable luxury. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," she began, but Sarah cut her off with a gentle but firm headshake. "There's no debt between women who understand each other's trials," she stated simply. "James told me some of what happened to you. Any mother would help another in such circumstances." As Abigail ate the most substantial meal she'd had in weeks, Sarah deftly changed Hope into the fresh garments, her experienced hands making quick work of the task. The older woman's competence with the infant suggested years of practice, though Abigail hesitated to ask personal questions of someone still essentially a stranger. Sarah seemed to sense her curiosity nonetheless. "We have 6 children," she offered. 4 living, 2 returned to the Creator as infants. Our youngest is 9 summers now." Her voice held no self-pity as she referenced the lost children, just the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of frontier realities. "You're Shawnee," Abigail ventured, her curiosity overcoming propriety. Cherokee, Sarah corrected, from the southern mountains. James was a trader with my father's band before the removal began. A shadow crossed her features at mention of the devastating forced migration that had torn so many Cherokee from their ancestral lands. We married according to both our traditions and traveled north before the soldiers came. That was 22 years ago now. The revelation that this poised, competent woman had successfully navigated life between two often hostile cultures for over 2 decades gave Abigail a spark of hope for her own uncertain future. If Sarah Jackson had forged a path, perhaps she could too, though her circumstances were admittedly different. "Your husband mentioned Fort Williams," Abigail said, returning to the practical matters at hand. "Do you think I'd be safe there from Vernon?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "Fort Williams has grown considerably in recent years, nearly 800 souls now, with new arrivals each month. A widow with a child would attract little notice, especially if you arrived with a plausible story about losing your husband to fever or accident along the trail." The logic was sound, yet Abigail found herself reluctant to embrace the plan. "And my land claim? The papers Vernon wanted badly enough to—" She gestured toward her splinted leg. "That requires more thought," Sarah acknowledged. "James knows. People at the fort who might help establish your rights. But presenting those papers means revealing your true identity. It's a risk you'll need to weigh carefully." Before Abigail could respond, another knock sounded at the door. Sarah opened it to admit her husband, his imposing frame filling the doorway as he entered. "Morning, Mrs. Thornton," Jackson greeted, his voice pitched low as if conscious of potential eavesdroppers, despite the private location. "Glad to see you looking more rested. How's the little one?" "We're both much improved, thank you," Abigail replied. "Your wife has been incredibly kind." Jackson's weathered face softened as he glanced at Sarah. "She's got a gift for knowing what folks need before they ask." His expression grew more serious as he turned back to Abigail. "I'm afraid I'll bring news you'll want to hear, though it's not all pleasant." Abigail braced herself, instinctively drawing hope closer. "Vernon?" "He's back," Jackson confirmed grimly. "Arrived at first light with 2 hired guns, asking if any news had come in about his dear sister-in-law. He's offering $20 for information now, a small fortune in these parts." The sum was indeed substantial, enough to tempt even relatively honest men in a frontier economy where hard currency was scarce. Abigail's throat tightened with fear. "Does anyone suspect I'm here?" "No one who'd talk," Jackson assured her. "My regular customers are mostly trappers and friendly tribes who've little love for men like Thornton. Still, we can't keep you hidden above the trading post indefinitely. Sooner or later, word would spread." "The Fort Williams plan, then?" Abigail asked, though her heart sank at the prospect. "That's one option," Jackson agreed, exchanging a meaningful glance with his wife. "But there might be another worth considering. I had an interesting conversation with Tall Elk this morning." Hope stirred against Abigail's chest, as if the mention of the Shawnee hunter's name held meaning even for her. "What did he say?" Abigail asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, despite the sudden quickening of her pulse. "He proposed an alternative that might solve several problems at once," Jackson explained, settling onto the room's only chair while Sarah perched on the edge of the bed. "But it would require considerable courage on your part, and trust in people you've only just begun to know." "I'm listening," Abigail said, her curiosity piqued despite her apprehension. Jackson leaned forward, his manner earnest. "Tall Elk suggests that instead of Fort Williams, you might consider returning with him to the Shawnee village, not temporarily as before, but with intent to stay through the winter months at least." The proposal was so unexpected that Abigail momentarily lost the ability to respond, Return to the village, voluntarily. Before you dismiss the idea, Jackson continued, noting her surprise, consider the practical advantages. Your brother-in-law would never think to search for you among the Shawnee. He'd assume any white woman found by natives would have met a far different fate. The logic was undeniable. Vernon would exhaust his search efforts along settler routes and at frontier outposts like Fort Williams. The idea that she might be living willingly among the Shawnee would never occur to him, or if it did, would be dismissed as implausible. There's more to consider, Sarah added gently. The journey to Fort Williams requires days of travel by wagon. Your leg is healing well, but such a trip would be difficult with a newborn, especially with men searching for you along those very routes. Again, the practical assessment was accurate. The Shawnee village, while remote by settler standards, was a relatively short journey from the trading post, one she had already proven capable of making even in her weakened state. But would they accept me? Abigail asked, voicing her deepest concern. There was an emergency before, a woman and child in desperate need. To deliberately choose to live among them is something else entirely. Chief Running River has already given his approval, Jackson revealed. According to Tall Elk, the women of the village, particularly Star Who Watches and Morning Sun, were instrumental in convincing him. It seems you made quite an impression. During your stay, the news that the Shawnee had actually discussed and approved her potential return touched Abigail deeply. These people, who had every historical reason to reject any white presence in their territory, were willing to extend sanctuary not just temporarily, but for months. There would be conditions, Jackson cautioned. You'd be expected to contribute to village life according to your abilities, to learn their language and ways, to respect their traditions, even those that might seem strange to you, and to understand that while many would welcome you, others might remain wary or even hostile. I understand, Abigail said softly, her mind racing with implications. And Hope? What would this mean for her? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Children adapt more readily than adults. She would grow up between worlds, yes, but with the protection of an entire community. The Shawnee revere their children, all children. She would not lack care or affection. The possibility began to take shape in Abigail's imagination. A winter spent in the security of the hidden village, learning skills that might serve her well, regardless of her eventual path. By spring, Vernon would likely have abandoned his search, convinced of her death or having moved on to other schemes. She could then reassess her options from a position of greater security. "And my land claim?" she asked, returning to the practical concern that had precipitated this entire ordeal. "Keep it safe," Jackson advised. "Come spring, if you choose to leave the village, we can revisit the legal aspects. I have contacts at Fort Williams who could help establish your rights without requiring your immediate presence." It was a temporary solution rather than a permanent one, but it addressed the most pressing issue, immediate survival for herself and hope in a place beyond Vernon's reach. The longer-term questions could wait until they were truly out of danger. "I need to speak with Tall Elk," Abigail decided. "This was his suggestion, but I want to hear his thoughts directly." Jackson nodded approval. "He's waiting below. I'll send him up if you're ready." At Abigail's affirmative nod, Jackson departed, leaving her alone with Sarah and Hope. The older woman rose, gathering the breakfast dishes onto the tray. "It's not an easy decision," she acknowledged. "Living between worlds never is, but sometimes the unexpected path leads to destinations we couldn't have imagined." With those cryptic words, Sarah departed, leaving Abigail to gather her thoughts before Tall Elk's arrival. She moved to the window, gazing out at the trading post yard where trappers and a few native traders conducted their business in the morning. Sunlight, Somewhere beyond those walls, Vernon continued his search, his determination fueled by greed and perhaps by injured pride at having his plans thwarted. A soft knock announced Tall Elk's presence. When Abigail called permission to enter, he stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He looked rested compared to the previous evening, though a certain wariness lingered in his posture, the natural vigilance of a man in potentially hostile territory. "Jackson told you?" he asked without preamble. Abigail nodded. "About returning to the village?" "Yes." "What do you think?" His direct question held no pressure, just genuine interest in her perspective. "I think it's unexpected," she admitted, "but also logical in ways I hadn't considered." She shifted Hope to her shoulder, patting the infant's back gently as she organized her thoughts. Would it truly be possible for a white woman and her child to live among the Shawnee for months? Tall Elk considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Difficult," he acknowledged, "but possible. Star who watches says you have a good heart, open mind. Morning sun calls you sister already." A hint of amusement touched his features. "Chief says keeping you safe from bad white men like your brother proves Shawnee superior. Many reasons to help, different for each person." The assessment seemed honest rather than artificially encouraging. "And you?" Abigail asked, meeting his gaze directly. "What is your reason?" Something flickered in Tall Elk's eyes, an emotion quickly contained, but not before Abigail glimpsed its intensity. "I found you," he said simply. "Responsibility continues until the journey ends." The words echoed his earlier explanation, yet Abigail sensed deeper currents beneath their surface. This man had risked his life multiple times for her and Hope, extending protection far beyond what obligation might reasonably demand. There was a connection here undeniable, despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and experiences. "If I return with you," she said carefully, "what would be expected of me?" "Learn," he replied without hesitation. "Learn language. Learn women's work. Cooking, sewing, plant gathering, share what you know in return. Respect ways different from your own." He paused, adding with surprising gentleness, "Not become Shawnee. Just live beside Shawnee for time needed." The distinction was important. This wasn't about erasing her identity or converting her to their spiritual beliefs. It was a practical arrangement offering mutual benefits, sanctuary for her, and perhaps for the village, a tangible connection to the white world that increasingly surrounded them. "Vernon won't stop looking easily," she warned. "If he ever discovered where I was, he would find many arrows pointing in his direction," Tall Elk finished with grim certainty. "Village is well hidden. Few white men know the location. Those who do, like Jackson, keep secrets." Hope began to fuss, and Abigail shifted her position to nurse the increasingly hungry infant. Tall Elk respectfully averted his gaze, focusing instead on the view through the small window. "When would we leave?" Abigail asked, making her decision, even as she posed the question. "Tomorrow at dawn," he answered, turning back as he recognized the implicit acceptance in her query. "Better to move quickly. Brother-in-law searches more areas each day." The timeline was sooner than Abigail had anticipated, but the logic was sound. Every day they delayed increased the risk that Vernon might hear rumors of Shawnee warriors bringing a white woman to the trading post's back entrance. "I'll be ready," she promised. "Will the others, Strongwater and the rest, accompany us again?" Tall Elk nodded. All returned together, safer. With arrangements settled, a companionable silence fell between them. Abigail found herself studying Tall Elk's profile as he gazed thoughtfully out the window. In the weeks since her rescue, she had come to know this man in ways that transcended normal acquaintances. They had shared danger and triumph, pain and healing. He had held her hand through Hope's birth, carried her when she couldn't walk, protected her when she was most vulnerable. In another life, under different circumstances, What might have developed between them? The question arose unbidden in her mind, startling in its clarity. Such thoughts were dangerous, she knew, not just because of the societal barriers that would condemn any deeper connection, but because she had no right to complicate this man's life further than she already had. Your thoughts travel far, Tall Elk observed, breaking the silence as he turned to face her once more. Abigail managed a small smile. Just contemplating this unexpected journey. 6 weeks ago, I was a pregnant widow joining my husband's family on what should have been a straightforward wagon journey west. Now, she glanced down at Hope, peacefully nursing at her breast. Now everything has changed. Life path not straight. Trail, Tall Elk responded, his expression contemplative. Many turns, many crossings. Sometimes the best path is not the one we planned. The simple philosophy resonated deeply with Abigail's experience. Nothing in her upbringing or education had prepared her for the circumstances in which she now found herself. Yet somehow, these unexpected turns had led to connections and insights she might never have gained on the straight trail of her expected life. I should let you rest, Tall Elk said, moving toward the door. Long journey tomorrow. Need strength. Wait, Abigail called as he reached for the handle. When he paused, she continued. Thank you, not just for the rescue or the protection, but for thinking of this solution, for seeing a path forward when I couldn't. He acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. You would have found a way. Strong woman, good mother. After a brief hesitation, he added, See you at dawn, before slipping quietly from the room. Alone once more with Hope, Abigail settled back on the bed, her mind filled with preparations for the journey ahead. There was little to pack, she owned. Virtually nothing beyond the buckskin dress on her back, the carrying sling for Hope, and the precious land claim papers secured at her waist. Yet the prospect of returning to the Shawnee village filled her with a curious mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Would she truly be able to adapt to life among people whose language and customs remained largely foreign to her? Would Hope thrive in this unconventional environment? And most importantly, would this unexpected sanctuary provide the time and space needed to determine their long-term future? A soft tap at the door interrupted her contemplation. Sarah entered, carrying a small bundle. I've brought a few things you might need, she explained, placing the package on the bed. Extra wrappings for the baby, a warmer blanket for you. The nights grow cold in the high valleys this time of year. You're very kind, Abigail said, genuinely touched by the older woman's thoughtfulness. Sarah settled on the edge of the bed, her expression turning serious. May I offer some advice from someone who has walked between worlds for many years? Please, Abigail encouraged, recognizing the value of such perspective. Learn everything you can, Sarah began. The Shawnee ways of healing, of finding food, of making do with what nature provides. These are skills that will serve you well wherever your path eventually leads. But always remember who you are at heart. Not to cling to prejudices or false pride, but to honor the core of yourself that remains constant regardless of circumstance. The counsel struck Abigail as both wise and practical. I'll remember, she promised. And one more thing, Sarah added, her voice softening. Be cautious with your heart. Feelings grow in unexpected places, especially in times of shared danger and gratitude. Not all seeds should be nurtured to bloom, no matter how tempting their potential beauty. The gentle warning confirmed that Sarah had observed what Abigail herself had barely begun to acknowledge. The complicated emotions developing between herself and Tall Elk. Emotions that, if allowed to flourish, could bring pain to both of them. In a world that showed little tolerance for connections that crossed the rigid boundaries between their peoples. I understand, Abigail murmured, neither confirming nor denying the unspoken implication. Sarah patted her hand in maternal fashion. Rest now. Dawn comes early and the path to the village is no gentle stroll. With that practical reminder, she departed, leaving Abigail to contemplate the journey that awaited, not just the physical trek to the Shawnee village, but the more complex navigation of the months ahead. As hope drifted to sleep against her chest, Abigail found her thoughts turning to morning sun, to Star who watches, to the other women of the village who had shown her kindness during her time of greatest need. Among them, perhaps, she would find not just safety from Vernon's pursuit, but a community that might help her rebuild the sense of belonging that had been shattered when she was cast from the wagon train. Tomorrow would bring the next chapter in their extraordinary journey. For tonight, the simple security of Jackson's trading post offered enough peace to rest and gather strength for whatever challenges lay ahead. Dawn broke with a thin mist hovering over the trading post yard as Abigail descended the back staircase, hope securely fastened in her carrying sling. Sarah Jackson waited below, a basket of provisions in her hands and concern etched on her features. "The riders have returned," she warned in a hushed voice. Vernon Thornton and his men arrived just after first light, demanding to search the premises. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. "Does he suspect I'm here?" "No," Sarah assured her. "James is keeping them occupied in the main hall with coffee and tales of possible sightings upriver. But we must move quickly. Tall Elk and the others are waiting at the edge of the forest." With a steadying breath, Abigail prepared to step into the yard, only to pause as Sarah pressed a small object into her hand. Looking down, she found herself holding a worn silver thimble. "It was my mother's," Sarah explained. "A small thing, but useful, and a reminder that even in the strangest of circumstances, we carry pieces of our past with us." Touched beyond words by the unexpected gift, Abigail impulsively embraced the older woman. "Thank you for everything." Sarah returned the embrace briefly before drawing back with practical urgency. "Go now. Stay close to the shadows along the palisade. James will ensure no one follows." The crossing of the yard proved heart-stoppingly tense. Each step on the dew-dampened ground seemed to echo unnaturally loud in Abigail's ears, though logic told her the sounds of commerce from the main trading hall would mask any noise she made. Hope mercifully remained silent, perhaps lulled by the early hour and the gentle motion of her mother's careful progress. The small rear gate stood ajar, a single figure visible just beyond. Silas, the weathered man who had first admitted them to the trading post. He nodded tersely as Abigail approached, gesturing toward a dense stand of trees some 50 yards distant. "They're waiting at the old trapper's blind," he murmured. "Straight path, don't deviate. I'll secure the gate behind you." With a final glance back at the trading post that had offered a brief but crucial sanctuary, Abigail stepped through the gate and into the wilderness once more. The cool morning air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, familiar now after her weeks in the forest. Her splinted legs still ached with each step, but the pain had dulled to a manageable discomfort that no longer dominated her awareness. As promised, Tall Elk and the other warriors waited at a camouflage shelter nearly invisible among the trees. Swift Fox spotted her first, raising a hand in greeting before melting back into the forest to secure their perimeter. Strong Water and Pine Bark were checking their weapons and supplies, while Young Hawk seemed to be studying the faint trail that would lead them back to the Shawnee village. Tall Elk stepped forward to meet her, his expression revealing relief at her safe rival. "Vernon inside the trading post?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," Abigail confirmed. "Sarah says Jackson is keeping them occupied, but we should move quickly." Tall Elk nodded, turning to confer briefly with Strong Water in their native tongue. Within moments the group had organized itself into traveling formation, Strong Water taking the lead as before, with Young Hawk ranging ahead as scout. Pine Bark and Swift Fox would guard the rear, while Tall Elk remained at Abigail's side to assist with the challenging terrain. "Different paths than before," he explained as they set out. "Longer route, safer from searching eyes." The strategy made sense. Vernon would likely focus his search along the main trails and riverways, not the obscure game paths and ancient hunting routes known only to the Shawnee. Still, the prospect of a longer journey with her still healing leg and newborn daughter weighed on Abigail's mind. As if sensing her concern, Tall Elk added, "Many rest stops. No need for haste once away from the trading post. 3 days' journey, maybe 4. The first hours passed in tense silence as they put distance between themselves and Jackson's trading post. The terrain was challenging but navigable, with strong water selecting a path that avoided the steepest climbs, while still maintaining a safe distance from the more traveled routes below. By mid-morning, they had reached a small clearing beside a spring-fed pool, deemed safe enough for a brief rest. As Abigail settled on a fallen log to nurse hope, Swift Fox returned from scouting their back trail, his expression serious as he reported to Tall Elk. "Riders," he said in English, ensuring Abigail understood. 3 men, following the old trapper. Path, not our trail, but close. The news sent a chill through Abigail despite the warming day. "Vernon." Tall Elk translated Swift Fox's more detailed report in Shawnee. "He thinks yes. 1 man matches the description, armed with rifles, moving quickly. How did they know which way to search?" Abigail wondered aloud, fear sharpening her voice. "Many trappers at the trading post," Tall Elk reasoned. "Some saw the Shawnee party arrive days ago, maybe mention it to the wrong ears." It was a plausible explanation. The trading post served as a crossroads of information as much as goods, with trappers and travelers exchanging news and observations over Jackson's coffee and whiskey. A casual comment about Shawnee warriors arriving with an unusual burden could have reached Vernon, triggering his suspicions. "We continue," Strongwater decided, gesturing toward a ridge to the east. "Cross high ground. Harder travel, but watching eyes look to river valleys." The revised route meant steeper climbing, but Abigail nodded agreement without hesitation. The prospect of falling into Vernon's hands far outweighed any physical discomfort the journey might entail. Accepting Tall Elk's steadying hand, she rose and prepared to resume their trek, hope once again secured against her chest. The day stretched into a grueling test of endurance as they navigated increasingly difficult terrain. Tall Elk remained a constant presence at Abigail's side, his strong and often the only thing preventing a dangerous fall on the steepest sections. Unlike their previous journey, conversation was minimal, all energy focused on putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered above the mountains, promising rain before nightfall. Strongwater selected a sheltered campsite beneath an overhanging rock face that would provide some protection from the elements. As Swift Fox and Pine Bark gathered firewood, Young Hawk disappeared into the forest, returning shortly with 2 rabbits for their evening meal. The simple efficiency with which the men established camp impressed Abigail anew. Within an hour, a small fire burned cheerfully beneath the rock overhang. The rabbits were roasting on improvised spits, and sleeping areas had been arranged with Abigail's comfort clearly prioritized. This was not the first time she had witnessed their wilderness skills, yet the seamless cooperation continued to fascinate her. As darkness fell and rain began to patter against the leaves outside their rocky shelter, Tall Elk settled beside Abigail, offering a wooden cup filled with a herbal tea he had prepared. "For strength," he explained. "Long walk today, more tomorrow." Accepting the warm drink gratefully, Abigail found herself studying his profile in the firelight. Despite the day's exertions, he showed few signs of fatigue, his movements as controlled and deliberate as ever. Yet subtle indicators, the slight tension around his eyes, the careful way he stretched his shoulders, suggested that maintaining their pace while remaining alert for pursuit had taken its toll even on his conditioned physique. "I'm sorry to bring such trouble to you and your people," she said softly. Tall Elk's response was immediate and firm. "No apology needed. Vernon is the problem, not you." After a moment's consideration, he added, "Protecting life is the Shawnee way. Star who watches says a child born in our care connects us. Responsibility is sacred." The sentiment touched Abigail deeply. In her experience of settler society, obligations were often transactional. Help given with expectation of return, kindness extended with calculation of benefit. This more holistic view of responsibility, of connections formed through circumstance and honored regardless of convenience, represented a perspective she found increasingly compelling. Hope stirred against her chest, rooting hungrily despite. Having nursed barely an hour before, the infant's appetite had increased noticeably in recent days, a healthy sign, but one that demanded frequent feeding. As Abigail adjusted her dress to nurse, she became aware of swift fox and pine bark, discreetly moving to positions that offered her privacy while maintaining the camp's security. Such consideration from men who, according to everything she had been raised to believe, should have been savages incapable of respect or delicacy, continued to challenge her preconceptions. The gap between what she had been taught about native peoples and what she had experienced firsthand grew wider with each passing day. "When we reach the village," Tall Elk said, breaking into her thoughts, "Morning Sun has prepared a place in her lodge. Her husband, Black Hawk, returns soon from hunting. Good man, respect boundaries." The practical details of her upcoming residence in the Shawnee village had not yet been discussed, and Abigail welcomed this glimpse of the arrangements. "Morning Sun has been so kind. I don't want to be a burden." "Not a burden," Tall Elk corrected. "In the village everyone contributes. You will learn women's work, help with daily tasks. Morning Sun says if you have clever hands, you will learn quickly." The prospect of integration into village life, of having a defined role and purpose beyond simply hiding from Vernon, appealed to Abigail's practical nature. Idleness had never suited her, even before circumstances had demanded such resilience. "And you?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider. "Where is your place in the village?" A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or possibly pleasure at her interest, crossed Tall Elk's features. "My lodge stands near River Bend. Good fishing place. I have lived alone since my wife died 3 winters ago. No children." The revelation of his widowed status answered questions Abigail had wondered but felt inappropriate to ask. That he had experienced similar loss created yet another unexpected connection between them, a shared understanding of grief and its aftermath. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "About your wife." Tall Elk nodded acceptance of her sympathy. "Good woman, strong, spirit. Illness took her quickly." After a contemplative pause, he added, "Life continues, different path now." The philosophical acceptance in his tone impressed Abigail. Her own grief for her husband had been complicated by the circumstances of their marriage, a union based more on practical considerations than deep affection. While she had mourned William Thornton sincerely, the pain had come as much from shattered stability as from lost love. Tall Elk's grief seemed both more profound and more reconciled, a wound acknowledged but incorporated into the continuing journey of his life. Their conversation was interrupted by Strongwater's return from scouting the perimeter. The older warrior spoke rapidly in Shawnee, his usual stoic expression betraying unusual concern. Tall Elk listened intently, his own features growing grave. "What is it?" Abigail asked when the exchange concluded. "Campfire," Tall Elk translated. "Valley below. 3 men, too close for comfort." Fear clutched at Abigail's chest. Vernon? Strong water thinks yes, following the ridgeline where we traveled earlier today. The implication was clear. Despite their precautions, Vernon and his hired guns had managed to track their general direction. They weren't yet on the exact trail, but they were close enough to pose a genuine threat. "We should move," Abigail suggested, already gathering hope, closer in preparation. Tall Elk shook his head. "Too dangerous in darkness. Rain makes footing treacherous. Better to stay, keep watch, leave before dawn." He gestured toward the sleeping area prepared for her. "Rest now, need strength for an early start." Though anxiety made the prospect of sleep seem unlikely, Abigail recognized the wisdom in his decision. Attempting to navigate mountain trails in darkness, particularly with her healing leg and an infant to protect, would likely lead to injury. Or worse, better to use the night hours to recover their strength for what promised to be another demanding day. As she settled onto the bed of pine boughs the men had prepared, Hope nursing contentedly at her breast, Abigail found her thoughts turning to Vernon's relentless pursuit. What drove him to such lengths? The land claim she carried was valuable, certainly, but valuable enough to justify this extended hunt through dangerous territory? Or had her escape become a matter of pride as much as greed, a challenge to his authority that he couldn't allow to stand? Either way, the immediate concern remained evasion. Once they reached the hidden Shawnee village, she would be beyond his reach, unless he somehow discovered its location. Given the care with which the native communities guarded such information that seemed unlikely without a tracker skilled in reading signs few settlers would recognize. "Sleep," Tall Elk encouraged, noting her restless thoughts. "I took my first watch. Nothing happens tonight." His quiet confidence provided enough reassurance for Abigail to close her eyes, allowing exhaustion to gradually overcome anxiety. Her last conscious awareness was of Tall Elk settling into position near the shelter's entrance, his profile outlined against the dying fire as he maintained vigilant guard over their temporary sanctuary. Dawn arrived with clearing skies and a distinct chill in the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. The camp stirred to life in near silence, meaningful glances and gestures replacing words as the warriors prepared for departure with heightened caution. Hope, sensing the tension perhaps, remained unusually quiet, her wide eyes tracking the movement around her with infant curiosity. "Vernon's camp?" Abigail asked Tall Elk in a whisper as he helped her secure the carrying sling. "Still there," he confirmed, "but we leave now. Stay ahead. Different path today, harder to follow." The different path soon revealed itself to be a challenging route that followed a series of rocky ridgelines where tracks would be difficult, if not impossible, to leave. The going was slow and often treacherous, requiring careful navigation of loose stone and narrow passages. For Abigail, whose leg had begun to ache persistently with the previous day's exertion, each step became an exercise in determination over discomfort. Tall Elk remained constantly attentive, his strong hand often the difference between secure footing and a dangerous fall. What struck Abigail most, however, was not just his physical assistance, but the subtle encouragement he provided. A nod of approval when she navigated a difficult section, a reassuring smile when fatigue threatened to overwhelm her resolve. Pace, mid-morning, Hope had grown fractious, her normal patience exhausted by the constant motion and increasing hunger. When they paused briefly at a sheltered hollow, Abigail found herself struggling to soothe the infant while maintaining vigilance against potential pursuit. To her surprise, Strong Water approached, gesturing with unexpected gentleness toward the crying child. "May I?" he asked in his limited English. Though momentarily hesitant, Abigail nodded permission. The weathered warrior carefully took Hope in his arms, cradling her with the confidence of experience. From a pouch at his waist, he produced what appeared to be a small whistle carved from bone. Placing it to his lips, he blew a series of soft, melodic notes that immediately captured Hope's attention. The simple tune, reminiscent of birdsong yet distinctly musical, had an almost magical effect on the infant. Her cries subsided as she stared in fascination at strong water, tiny hands reaching toward the source of the enchanting sound. "Old magic," the warrior explained with the hint of a smile. "For my grandchildren when restless. Works for all little ones, even those with pale skin." The moment of connection across cultural boundaries touched Abigail deeply. This man, who had initially regarded her with such suspicion, now offered his skill and experience to comfort her child. It represented yet another example of the complex humanity she had discovered among people she had been taught to fear and distrust. As they resumed their journey, strong water returned hope to Abigail's arms, but not before pressing the small bone whistle into her hand. "For when needed," he said simply, the gift requiring no further explanation. The terrain gradually shifted as they traveled northward, the rocky ridges giving way to denser forest where massive trees provided both cover from observation and natural obstacles to pursuit. Young Hawk now took the lead, his woodcraft evident in the way he selected their path, sometimes backtracking to cross streams in ways that would confuse followers, other times choosing routes that left minimal sign of their passage. By mid-afternoon, Tall Elk confirmed what Abigail had begun to hope. They had successfully put significant distance between themselves and Vernon's search party. "No sign on back trail," he reported after consulting with Swift Fox. "Think we lost them at a rocky crossing." The news brought welcome relief, though Abigail knew better than to assume the danger had passed entirely. Vernon had demonstrated remarkable persistence thus far. One setback was unlikely to deter him completely. As day faded toward evening, Strong Water identified a suitable campsite, a small clearing adjacent to a spring-fed stream, sheltered on three sides by dense undergrowth. Unlike the previous night's tense, minimal arrangements, this camp had a more settled feel, with Pine Bark actually constructing a small lean-to for Abigail and Hope, while young Hawk and Swift Fox gathered extensive firewood for a proper cooking. "Fire. One more day to the village," Tall Elk explained, as he helped Abigail settle beneath the lean-to's protection. "Easier path tomorrow? No sign of followers." The prospect of reaching their destination brought mixed emotions. On one hand, the Shawnee village represented safety from Vernon's pursuit, a secure haven where she and Hope could recover fully from their ordeal. On the other, it meant transition to an entirely new way of life, with challenges she could only partially anticipate. "Will it be strange," she asked Tall Elk, as darkness gathered around their camp, "having a white woman living among your people?" He considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "Yes, strange for you. Strange for some in the village." A slight smile touched his lips. "But life is always strange in some way. Difference makes us see with new eyes." The philosophical perspective was becoming familiar, this capacity to acknowledge difficulty without allowing it to overshadow possibility. It represented an approach to life's challenges that Abigail found increasingly compelling, especially after her recent experiences had demolished so many of her previous certainties. "I'm grateful," she said softly, "for everything you and your people have done for Hope and me. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness. No debt between people who walk the same path," Tall Elk replied, echoing unexpectedly the sentiment Sarah Jackson had expressed. "You teach us things too. Your courage, your willingness to trust when given no reason, these are gifts also." As night deepened around them, and Hope drifted to sleep against her chest, Abigail found herself contemplating the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. What had begun as the worst tragedy of her life, betrayal, abandonment, The threat of death for herself and her unborn child had transformed into an unexpected journey of discovery. Not just physical survival, but the discovery of strength within herself she hadn't known existed, and connections with people who, by all the rules of her previous world, should have remained forever alien. Tomorrow would bring arrival at the Shawnee village and the beginning of yet another chapter in their remarkable story. Whatever challenges awaited, Abigail felt prepared to face them with a resilience forged through adversity and supported by unexpected allies who had become something closer to friends. As she drifted toward sleep, lulled by the gentle sounds of the forest night and the reassuring presence of the warriors who maintained vigilant watch around their camp, Abigail's final conscious thought was one of cautious optimism. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since being cast from the wagon, she faced that uncertainty not with fear, but with hope. The Shawnee village appeared before them as the afternoon sun filtered through autumn-tinged leaves, casting dappled light across the collection of dwellings nestled within the protective embrace of the valley. Smoke rose in thin spirals from cooking fires, carrying the scent of roasting meat and herbs that stirred unexpected feelings of homecoming in Abigail's heart. At the edge of the clearing, their party paused as young Hawk moved ahead to announce their arrival. Though they had successfully evaded Vernon's pursuit over the past 2 days, caution remained ingrained in their movements, a natural vigilance born of weeks of danger. "Home," Tall Elk said simply, watching Abigail's reaction to the sight of the village. "Home," she echoed, testing the word as it applied to this unexpected sanctuary. Hope stirred against her chest, as if sensing the significance of their arrival. Within moments, figures emerged from the village, first children running with unrestrained curiosity, then women moving with more measured purpose, and finally, the dignified form of Chief Running River himself, accompanied by Star who watches, her lined face creasing into a rare smile at the sight of Abigail and Hope. Morning sun broke from the gathering crowd, hurrying forward with her own infant secured on her back. Without hesitation, she embraced Abigail in a gesture that transcended their language barrier. "Welcome, sister," she said in careful English, one of the few phrases she had mastered during Abigail's previous stay. The genuine warmth of this reception eased the lingering anxiety that had shadowed Abigail's decision to return. Whatever challenges lay ahead in navigating life among the Shawnee, this fundamental acceptance provided solid ground on which to build. Star who watches approached next, her weathered hands immediately reaching for Hope with a healer's instinct to assess the infant's well-being. After a thorough examination that included gentle prodding and soft murmurs of approval, she nodded satisfaction. "She says hope grows strong," Tall Elk translated, pride evident in his voice, though the child was not his own. "Good milk, good spirit." Chief Running River stepped forward, his bearing formal yet not unwelcoming. He spoke at length, pausing periodically to allow Tall Elk to translate his words. "The chief says you return to our village by choice, not necessity. This shows wisdom. While danger passes, you will learn our ways, and we will learn from you. The child born on our land will know both worlds, a bridge between peoples who, too, often see only differences." The eloquent welcome spoke to a level of consideration that continued to challenge Abigail's preconceptions. This was no impulsive hospitality, but a thoughtful integration of her presence into the broader context of their community. "Tell him I'm grateful," she responded, meeting the chief's steady gaze, "and that I'll do everything I can to honor the trust his people have shown us." As Tall Elk translated her words, Abigail noted the subtle nods of approval from the gathered elders. Her promise of respect clearly carried weight among people who had every historical reason to distrust white intentions. Morning Sun stepped forward again, gesturing toward a lodge near the center of the village. "Come," she encouraged, taking Abigail's arm. "Rest now. Everything is ready." Abigail glanced toward Tall Elk, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had been her constant protector through so many dangers. He nodded encouragement, understanding her momentary hesitation. "Go," he said gently. "Morning Sun has prepared well. I will come later, check that all is good." With that reassurance, Abigail allowed herself to be led toward the dwelling that would become her home for the coming months. The interior proved unexpectedly comfortable. Pine boughs freshly laid for bedding, furs arranged for warmth, a small fire already kindled in the central pit. In one corner stood a cradleboard decorated with intricate beadwork, clearly crafted with hope in mind. "For baby," Morning Sun explained proudly, demonstrating how the cradle could be propped upright or laid flat as needed. "My hands make it." The gift represented hours of skilled labor, freely given to welcome a child not of her blood or people. It epitomized the generosity Abigail had encountered repeatedly among the Shawnee, a willingness to share resources and skills that stood in stark contrast to the brutal calculation that had led Vernon to cast her aside for material gain. The first days in the village established patterns that would carry through the winter months ahead. Each morning, Abigail joined the women at their various tasks, learning to prepare hides, to identify and gather useful plants, to weave baskets from river reeds. Her initially clumsy attempts were met with patient correction rather than mockery. Each small improvement celebrated as meaningful progress. Hope thrived in this communal environment, passed happily from one set of experienced arms to another as Abigail worked. What might have seemed intrusive in settler society felt natural. Here, where children were considered a shared blessing rather than private property. The infant's distinctive red-gold hair and fair skin drew gentle touches of curiosity, but no rejection. Star, who watches, took particular interest in Abigail's healing leg, applying poultices and performing manipulation exercises that gradually restored more normal function. Though a slight limp remained, the pain diminished steadily under the elder's care. Evenings often found Abigail sitting with Morning Sun and other women near the central fire, struggling to master the basics of Shawnee language while they practiced the English words she taught in return. These exchanges frequently dissolved into laughter as both sides mangled pronunciation, yet real communication grew from these imperfect efforts. Tall Elk maintained a respectful distance during these early weeks, visiting regularly to check on Abigail and Hope's well-being, but carefully observing the boundaries of propriety. His role shifted gradually from protector to teacher, introducing Abigail to the forest surrounding the village with the same patience he showed Hope when the growing infant grasped at his fingers with determined curiosity. One crisp morning, as autumn deepened toward winter, he appeared at Morning Sun's lodge with an unexpected invitation. "Come," he said simply, "something to show you." Bundling Hope securely against the chill, Abigail followed him along a narrow trail that wound through frost-tinged underbrush toward a ridge overlooking the valley. The climb challenged her healing leg, but months of daily activity had built endurance she hadn't possessed before. At the summit, Tall Elk paused, gesturing toward the panoramic view. Below them spread not only the Shawnee village, but the broader landscape beyond. Rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, rivers cutting silver paths through forests ablaze with autumn colors. "Beautiful," Abigail breathed, the simple word, inadequate for the majesty before them. "Yes," Tall Elk agreed, "but not what I bring you to see." He pointed toward the eastern horizon, where a thin column of smoke rose against the sky. "Settler cabin, new since summer, 3 more beyond the ridge there." Understanding dawned with unsettling clarity. "They're getting closer." Tall Elk nodded, his expression grave yet not fearful. Each season, more comes. Building, clearing, pushing deeper into hunting grounds. The observation carried no accusation, just a statement of reality that Abigail couldn't deny. Her own people, those she had once unquestioningly considered her people, continued their relentless expansion into territories the Shawnee had inhabited for countless generations. "I'm sorry," she said, the apology feeling simultaneously necessary and woefully inadequate. "No need," Tall Elk assured her. "Not what you're doing. But it's important you understand. Village moves next spring, further north, deeper into mountains. Harder place, but safer from settler eyes." The revelation struck with unexpected force. The village had become home in ways Abigail hadn't fully acknowledged until confronted with its impermanence. "And Hope and I?" Tall Elk met her gaze directly. "Choice will be yours. By spring, Vernon likely gave up searching. Fort Williams is still an option, or..." He hesitated briefly. "Come to the village. Not an easy life, but people know you now. Accept you. Hope, too." The decision stretched before her like a fork in a trail, each path leading toward drastically different futures. Return to white society, where her unusual story would follow her like a shadow, yet where her daughter would grow up among her own kind. Or continue this unexpected journey among the Shawnee, embracing an increasingly nomadic existence as settlement pressure pushed them further from ancestral lands. "I don't have to decide now?" she asked, needing time to contemplate such a momentous choice. "Not now," Tall Elk confirmed. "Winter gives time for thinking." After a thoughtful pause, he added, "But whatever choice, something true remains." "What's that?" His hand moved to rest gently on Hope's head, a gesture of blessing reminiscent of strong waters on their journey to the village. "This child bridges two worlds. Whatever path, that truth remains. Born of one person, saved by another, both live in her spirit now." The wisdom in his observation resonated deeply. Hope would indeed carry the influence of both cultures, regardless of Abigail's ultimate decision. The connection forged through compassion and shared survival had altered their story in ways that could never be undone. As they descended the ridge, returning to the village where smoke rose peacefully from lodge fires, Abigail found herself contemplating not just the months ahead, but years beyond. Whatever future unfolded, whether at Fort Williams among settlers or traveling with the Shawnee into more remote territories, the experience of being cast aside by her own people and rescued by those she had been taught to fear had forever changed her understanding of humanity in all its complexity. The uncertain path ahead no longer filled her with dread, but with a cautious anticipation. She had survived abandonment, childbirth in extraordinary circumstances, and the dangerous journey that followed. She had found strength within herself she hadn't known existed, and formed connections across boundaries she once considered impenetrable. Hope gurgled happily against her chest, reaching toward Tall Elk with instinctive trust. Whatever choice Abigail ultimately made, one certainty remained. The compassionate Shawnee hunter who had found her broken and abandoned had given her not just physical survival, but the rarer gift of a new perspective, one that would guide her and her daughter through whatever challenges awaited in the seasons to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.